I went camping alone in the late summer of 2019, far from the small town of Montvale in Northern Virginia. I had been stressed for months, and the idea of spending a weekend away from everything felt like the only thing that could clear my head. I picked a remote patch of forest I had found on a topographic map, a place without campsites, without marked trails, without anything except trees, muddy ground, and silence. It seemed like the perfect place to disappear for a bit. I arrived early in the afternoon, the sky washed in a pale, dull blue that made everything look slightly faded. The heat clung to the air in a heavy, sticky way, and even the breeze felt warm. My backpack dug hard into my shoulders as I hiked deeper into the woods. The trail I followed at first slowly thinned out and faded into the underbrush. Soon, I was stepping over fallen logs, pushing branches aside, and moving mostly by instinct. The ground was soft from rain earlier that week, and my boots made muffled prints in the damp soil. I didn't see a single person or even hear distant traffic. The deeper I went, the more it felt like the world behind me dissolved. After a couple of hours, I found a small clearing surrounded by tall oaks and thick ferns. It felt hidden enough that nobody would stumble across it by accident. The sun was still high, and I had plenty of time to set up my tent. I placed it near a fallen tree that looked like it had been dead for years, its bark stripped off by weather and insects. The ground there was flat, and I hammered the stakes in until they felt secure. Then I gathered some fallen branches for a small fire. The humidity clung to everything, so I wasn't sure the fire would take. But after enough attempts, the kindling caught and a thin flame grew. As the sun lowered, the air cooled a little. The forest around me became darker much faster than the sky. The tall canopy blocked most of the remaining light, and the shadows thickened into shapes that stretched across the clearing. I cooked a simple meal over the fire and listened to the sounds around me. Crickets, small rustles in the leaves, the occasional soft thump of something dropping from a tree. Everything felt normal, peaceful, almost predictable. The forest had that natural rhythm you settle into once you've been in it long enough. But as the first real stretch of night arrived, that rhythm changed. I couldn't explain it at first. It wasn't one specific sound or movement. It was the absence of something. The forest felt emptied out. The insects that had been buzzing and chirping went quiet as if someone had shut off a switch. The silence thickened until I could hear my own heartbeat inside my ears. Even the breeze seemed to pause. The stillness became heavy, pressing down on me in a way that felt unnatural, even though I kept telling myself there was nothing supernatural about it. Just nature being unpredictable. The fire crackled softly, and its glow made the darkness beyond the clearing look even darker. While staring into the trees, I started to feel watched. Not in a paranoid, imagined way. More like the same sensation you get when someone stands behind you without making a sound. Crawled across the back of my neck, sinking into my shoulders. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling stayed. I forced myself to stay calm. I checked the area around the clearing, moving slowly and making sure I didn't step too far from the light of the fire. The beams of my flashlight caught only trees, branches, and scattered leaves. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. The fear didn't really come until I noticed the tracks. They weren't animal tracks. They were footprints, human footprints. They were pressed into the soft soil near the edge of the clearing, half hidden by some fallen leaves. They weren't mine. Mine were deeper and spaced differently. These were lighter, newer, and facing directly toward my campsite. I stared at them longer than I should have. They looked like they had been made within the last few hours, maybe even more recent than that. My chest tightened. I scanned the trees again, trying to spot any movement, but the forest remained still. I kept telling myself they could have belonged to someone who passed through earlier in the day. A hiker, a hunter, anyone. But the silence around me didn't support that comforting lie. Felt wrong again. like a thick blanket placed over sound. I backed toward the tent, grabbing my small hatchet from beside the fire. Even with it in my hand, my grip felt weak. The firelight flickered, and shadows reached across the clearing like long fingers stretching from every direction. I sat down near the tent, trying to stay alert. The seconds dragged into minutes, and the minutes dragged into what felt like hours. My eyes kept darting from tree to tree, my ears straining for any sound at all. Finally came a slow, careful step, then another. They came from somewhere in the darkness behind the ferns. The steps were spaced too far apart to be a small animal. The weight of each one pressed lightly into the ground, controlled, almost cautious. Someone was out there, moving with intention, moving in a way that felt practiced. The part of the evening that scared me the most wasn't the sound itself. It was the fact that whoever was out there stopped moving as soon as I turned my flashlight toward the area. The beam slid across trees, leaves, and bushes, but nothing shifted. Nothing reacted. But the silence that followed felt sharper, like whoever was watching realized I knew. I stayed awake the whole night. I didn't go into the tent. I kept the fire alive, feeding it every time it started to shrink. I sat with my back against my backpack so nothing could approach me from behind. My legs ached, my eyes burned, and my thoughts kept running in circles. Every few minutes I thought I heard something, a soft shuffle, a faint breath of movement, a distant crack of a stick, but I couldn't be sure if any of it was real or just my nerves breaking down. When the sky finally began to lighten, the forest slowly returned to life. Birds started making soft calls. The breeze picked up again, brushing through the branches in a gentle rhythm. The normal sounds I had missed came back one by one. It felt like the world was exhaling, waking up from something it didn't want to acknowledge. With the daylight giving me strength, I walked toward the area where I had heard the steps. The moss and leaves were disturbed. Fresh impressions marked the ground, more footprints, clearer this time. They circled part of the clearing and stopped only a few meters from where I had been sitting all night. Whoever had been out there had stood close enough to see every move I made. The weight of that hit me harder than anything else. I didn't waste time packing. I shoved everything into my backpack, even things that didn't fit properly, and left the tent staked down because taking it apart would have taken too long. I followed the same path I had come from, walking fast, sometimes jogging, constantly checking behind me. The forest looked normal again, but the feeling never lifted. I didn't slow down until I reached my car. When I finally drove back toward town, the relief didn't hit me all at once. It came in small waves, each one settling deeper as the distance grew between me and that clearing. By the time I reached Montvale, the sun was bright, the roads were busy, and the world felt grounded again. But even then, a part of me stayed tense. In the days after, I kept thinking about the footprints. They weren't old. They weren't passing through. They were watching. Someone had been out there in the dark woods, silent, patient, waiting only a few steps beyond the light where I couldn't see them. If I had fallen asleep or gone inside the tent, I don't know what would have happened. I never went back to that forest. I never even tried camping alone again. Every time I think about it, I can still picture the shape of those footprints in the soft soil, each one pointed straight toward me, each one a reminder that the scariest thing out there wasn't any creature or story, just another person who stayed hidden in the night, too close, too quiet, and for reasons I'll never understand. And that was enough to change the way I see the woods forever. I had planned the camping trip for months. It was the summer of 2021, and I had just turned 26, old enough to be responsible but still young enough to want the kind of quiet that only comes from being alone in a place far away from busy roads and crowded towns. I picked a remote spot in Northumberland, near an old forest not far from the Cheviot Hills. It wasn't some famous campsite with people and cars and noise. It was just a wild patch of land that hikers sometimes passed, but most people ignored. That was exactly why I chose it. I wanted to sit with the trees, the cold air, and the long stretches of silence that felt heavier than anything I knew back home in Leeds. I packed everything the night before: my tent, my old sleeping bag, a small stove, extra batteries, a headlamp, a knife that I only ever used for cooking, and a notebook I planned to fill with sketches of the landscape. I left early in the morning and reached the trail by noon. The weather was strange that day. It wasn't stormy, but there was a heaviness in the air, the kind that made the wind move slowly through the tall grass. The sky stayed gray and flat, like it couldn't choose whether it wanted to brighten or darken. I walked about 2 hours into the forest, moving deeper than I originally planned because everything looked peaceful and untouched, like time had passed through the trees without altering anything. By the time the sun started sinking behind the hills, I had found a clearing beside a line of tall, thin pines. The ground was soft, covered in dry needles, and there was a spot where the trees curved away just enough to make room for a tent. I set everything up the way I always did: stakes pushed deep, guy lines tight, sleeping bag fluffed out, food stored away from where I'd sleep. Everything felt fine. Everything felt normal. But normal is always temporary. After I set up camp, I walked a little way past the clearing to stretch my legs. The forest was quiet in the kind of way that felt too strong for comfort. I kept listening for small sounds, birds, insects, anything, but I heard almost nothing. Only my footsteps and the distant wind brushing the tops of the trees. I stayed out for about an hour before heading back to camp. I boiled some water for noodles and sat on a log while eating, the air around me slowly cooling. That was when I first noticed something strange. Across from my clearing, maybe 70 or 80 meters away, the pine trees grew very close together, forming dark clusters between the trunks. I wasn't looking for anything, but my eyes kept drifting to a particular spot between two trees. At first, I thought I imagined it, but the longer I stared, the more certain I became that something was standing there. A shape, tall, still, human. I froze and tried to make sense of it. It didn't move. It didn't tilt or breathe or shift. It was just standing there, as if watching me. I blinked hard, thinking it was only a shadow or the way the branches lined up. But the shape didn't vanish. It didn't soften or blur the way illusions usually do. It stayed the exact same height and size, fixed in the gap between the trunks. My mind tried to make excuses. Maybe it was a tree stump. Maybe someone had cut wood there, and the leftover trunk happened to look like a person at the right angle. Maybe the stress of the day made me see something that wasn't real. I forced myself to look away and focus on finishing my meal. When I looked back again later, the shape was gone. I tried to tell myself it must have been nothing, a trick of the light, a trick of my mind. I kept thinking that, repeating it until I started to believe it. But the feeling didn't go away. By the time the sky turned dark, the forest felt different. The wind stopped completely, letting every sound inside the trees sharpen and stretch out. I sat near the tent with my small lantern glowing weakly beside me, writing a few things in my notebook. But I couldn't relax. I kept glancing toward the tree line, searching for that shape again. It didn't appear, but the unease stayed. I eventually crawled into the tent. The air inside was warm from my body heat, and the thin smell of nylon mixed with the faint scent of pine from outside. I zipped the tent shut and lay down, listening to the distant creaks of the forest settling for the night. It took a long time before my eyes grew heavy. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up with a jolt. At first, I didn't understand why. My heart was pounding, and there was a pressure in my chest like I had been holding my breath. I lifted my head slightly, listening. There was a sound outside my tent. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was slow, very slow, like steady, cautious footsteps pressing into the pine needles. Not the light tapping of an animal, not the fast scurrying of something small. These steps were too deliberate, too heavy, too human. They stopped right outside my tent. I lay completely still, my breathing shallow and forced. The air became thick, and every muscle in my body tensed. I could hear the soft, measured shifting of weight, like someone was standing just inches from the thin fabric that separated us. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I just listened, my ears straining to pick up any hint of what was happening. Then I heard it, a slow drag of something soft across the tent wall. Not a hand, not a branch, more like fabric brushing against the nylon. Someone was leaning over my tent. My stomach dropped, turning cold in a way I had never felt before. I didn't know if the person was crouching, standing, or bending close to listen. I only knew they were too close, so close that I could hear their quiet shifting, like they were adjusting their weight with careful intention. Minutes passed, or maybe only seconds. Time felt stretched and warped. Then the sound moved again, this time circling around the back of the tent. I tracked each step with my breath trapped in my throat. The footsteps were slow, as if whoever it was wanted to avoid making noise. They stopped again right near the zipper. I waited for the sound of the zipper being pulled. It never came. Instead, after what felt like an eternity, the steps began moving away. Not through the clearing, but toward the dense trees opposite me, the same cluster where I'd seen the shape earlier. The steps faded slowly until I couldn't hear them anymore. I stayed awake until morning, gripping my small camping knife, my mind racing with every possible explanation. When the first light filled the clearing, I unzipped the tent with shaking hands. The forest was calm again, almost peaceful, but the ground told the truth. I saw the prints, long, narrow footprints pressed clearly into the needles. Human footprints. Someone had walked around my tent in the middle of the night, stopping at every side, lingering long enough to leave deeper impressions in the dirt. I didn't even pack my things properly. I just shoved everything into my bag, tore down the tent, and started hiking back toward the trail as fast as I could. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone stepping out from behind the trees. But the forest stayed still. When I finally reached my car, I felt the kind of relief that shakes your entire body. I drove until the forest was far behind me, and only stopped once I reached a busy petrol station. I never went back to that area again. I never tried to find out who that man was or why he was watching me. I didn't want answers. Some things don't need answers. Some things should stay in the dark place where you left them. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I still think about how silent the forest was, how still that shape stood, how slow those footsteps moved around my tent, and how easily something could have happened if I hadn't woken up at the right moment. Real danger doesn't always jump out or scream or scratch. Sometimes it simply watches. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes you don't realize how close it came until long after you've escaped it. That night taught me something I never forgot. You don't need ghosts to be scared. Sometimes a real human is more than enough. I had been driving for almost 10 hours when I finally pulled into the small dirt clearing that the old map on my phone called a primitive campsite. It was deep in northern Arizona, far from towns, far from the big highways, far from everything I was used to. I had taken a week off work to clear my head, convinced that being alone in the quiet would help me stop thinking about the useless noise of my life. I was 31, tired from months of sitting in front of screens, and I felt like I had forgotten what real silence sounded like. The campsite was nothing more than a patch of dry earth between tall pines. The forest looked darker than any place I had ever been. The sun was still up, but the shade under the trees was thick like a heavy curtain. The air smelled of resin, dust, and dry grass. It was late June, but the wind still had a cold bite even before sunset. I parked my small rental car on the flattest part one could find. There were no other cars around, no tents, no trash, not even footprints. It felt as if no one had camped there for a long time. I told myself that was good. I had wanted isolation, and I had found it. I unpacked slowly, stretching my legs after hours of sitting. The forest had a strange stillness, like it was watching me. Every small sound, my boots scraping the dirt, the rustle of a plastic bag, the soft clink of metal stakes, seemed louder than it should have been. I set up my tent near a fallen tree trunk and laid out my sleeping bag, a lantern, and my small stove. Everything felt normal enough, but there was something about the silence that made my chest feel tight. As the light faded, the temperature dropped fast. I cooked a small meal and ate while sitting on the trunk. Behind me, the forest stretched endlessly, the trees forming dark shapes as the sun dipped behind the ridge. Coyotes started calling somewhere far away, their cries echoing through the hills. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. I kept reminding myself that I was alone, and that was exactly what I wanted. When night finally settled, it came down hard. Without city lights, the darkness felt alive. My lantern cast a soft circle around the tent, but the space beyond it was pitch black. I sat inside the tent with the lantern turned low, trying to read a book, but my mind kept drifting to every tiny sound outside. Twigs snapping, leaves moving, wind brushing through the branches overhead. I knew all of it was normal, but in that silence, the smallest noise felt sharp and threatening. A little before midnight, the wind stopped completely. The air turned still and heavy. That was when I heard the first clear sound, something moving through the brush behind my tent. The steps were slow and heavy, not like an animal that moved quickly or nervously. It sounded deliberate. I froze, staring at the thin tent fabric as if I could see through it. My heart started pounding so hard that I could feel each beat in my throat. For a few seconds, the footsteps stopped. The forest became silent again, too silent, as if holding its breath. I thought maybe it was just a deer or an elk, but something about the weight and slowness of the steps didn't match. I sat perfectly still, listening for anything. Then the footsteps started again, this time even closer, brushing through the tall grass right behind where my head rested. I didn't make a sound. I didn't move. I kept my breath shallow, forcing myself not to panic. After almost a full minute, the steps faded. Whatever it was moved away into the darkness. I waited another 10 minutes before I dared to breathe normally. My hands were shaking as I turned off the lantern and lay down. I told myself it was wildlife, nothing more. But I didn't sleep, not even a little. Hours passed like that, staring upward at the dim outline of the ceiling, counting every second, waiting for daylight. My eyes felt dry and strained. My ears felt too alert, listening for the slightest sound. Around 3 in the morning, I heard something again, but it wasn't steps this time. It was a faint metal click, like something tapping against the side of my car. Once, then again. I felt a wave of cold rush through my chest. I didn't move. I listened. Another click, softer this time, like someone running a finger across the handle of the car door. I knew that animals didn't do that. Not like that. Not with slow, careful pressure. It was the kind of sound a person made when checking if the door was locked. I lay there frozen, every muscle tight. My heart beat so loud that I feared it would give me away. The car was only a few feet from the tent. If someone was out there, they were close enough to hear me breathing. I wished the tent had been thicker, wished I had parked closer, wished I had never chosen this spot. The clicking stopped. The forest fell silent again. I waited. Minutes passed with nothing but the sound of my pulse in my ears. Then I heard something much worse, soft steps circling the tent. Not hurried, just slow, measured, like someone studying the shape of it. The hair on my arms stood straight up. I couldn't do anything but stay silent. I had no weapon. My phone had no signal. The tent felt like a thin paper shell between me and whoever was out there. The steps paused right beside my head. I imagined a figure standing just inches away, staring down at the fabric, listening. My throat was dry. My body was shaking without my control, but I tried my hardest to stay still. After several long moments, the steps moved again, this time toward the front of the tent. I could hear the gentle crunch of dry needles under the weight of each step. A shadow passed across the faint moonlight leaking through the material. Then everything stopped again. 10 minutes passed. 15. 20. Nothing moved. Nothing touched the tent again. Eventually I realized the person, if it was a person, had walked away. But I didn't sleep after that. I didn't even unclench my fists. I just lay there in that cold, wet fear, waiting for morning. When the first gray light finally appeared, it felt like the whole world let out a breath. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stepped outside, my legs unsteady. The air was cold, but the relief of daylight was enough to warm me. I checked around the clearing. The dirt was disturbed near my car, and the thin layer of dust on the windows showed smudges. Long, thin streaks where something had dragged across the glass. I followed the marks around the car and stopped when I saw the small, clear imprint of a boot heel in the dirt. It wasn't old. The edges were sharp, like it had been made only hours before. I didn't pack slowly. I didn't even eat breakfast. I threw everything into the car as fast as I could. My hands were still trembling when I started the engine. I backed out of the clearing and drove down the rough road without looking back. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station nearly 50 miles away. Only then, in full daylight, surrounded by people and noise and the sound of cars, did the shaking finally stop. I had wanted silence, but I learned that silence wasn't peaceful when you were alone in the dark with someone you didn't know. I never found out who was at the campsite that night or what they wanted. But I know one thing with absolute certainty. It wasn't an animal, and it wasn't my imagination. Someone was out there, watching me in the dark, checking my car door, circling my tent while I lay inside unable to move. It was real, all of it, and I never camped alone again. It was early September in the Adirondack Mountains, about 2:30 in the afternoon, when I arrived at the campsite. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long, lazy shadows across the trail. I had been planning this solo camping trip for weeks. Just me, the wilderness, and a quiet weekend away from the noise of the city. I was 29, not exactly an expert at camping, but comfortable enough with it. I had all the gear I needed: a tent, a small stove, sleeping bag, and enough food for the weekend. The hike to the campsite wasn't particularly difficult, but it was long enough to make me feel like I had earned the rest. The air had that crisp, fresh mountain scent, the kind that makes you feel alive. I was looking forward to setting up my tent and just being alone with nature for a few days. The spot I chose was tucked away behind a stand of tall pines near a stream. It wasn't too far from the trail, but far enough that I wouldn't hear anyone passing by. I set my pack down beside a boulder, feeling the familiar mix of satisfaction and exhaustion that comes with a hike like this. It was a perfect spot, secluded, peaceful, and not a soul in sight. I began setting up my tent, taking my time. I wasn't in any hurry. By the time I finished, the sun had dipped lower in the sky, painting the clouds in streaks of purple and orange. It wasn't quite dusk yet, but I knew I should start thinking about dinner. I cooked a simple meal of pasta, nothing fancy, just something to fill me up after the hike. The silence around me was almost deafening. broken only by the distant rush of the stream and the occasional rustling of the wind through the trees. As I ate, I felt a strange sense of unease, a nagging feeling that I couldn't shake. It wasn't the typical scared of the dark feeling, more like the sensation that I wasn't entirely alone, that someone or something was watching me. I brushed it off as paranoia, reminding myself that I was just tired from the hike. Once I finished eating, I cleaned up, stowed my food away in a bear-proof container, and started a small campfire. The night air was cooling quickly, and the warmth from the fire felt good. I sat there for a while, staring into the flames, letting my thoughts drift. The peace of the moment was almost meditative, and the last remnants of unease started to fade. That's when I heard it, a soft crackling sound from the woods behind me, just beyond the reach of the firelight. I stiffened, my heart rate picking up. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but then the sound came again, louder this time. It wasn't a simple rustling of leaves. It was something heavier, more deliberate. Someone or something was moving around out there. I froze, straining my ears to listen. I couldn't hear any footsteps, but I could still feel the weight of whatever it was, just outside of my sight. I told myself it was probably another hiker, maybe someone else looking for a campsite. Still, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The noise didn't stop, and it felt wrong. It was too calculated, too intentional. I stood up and grabbed my flashlight, shining it toward the edge of the forest. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating nothing but trees and shadows. I swung it back and forth, but there was no movement, no sign of anyone. Maybe it was just an animal after all. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something. A figure standing still just beyond the trees, barely visible in the darkness. I blinked, and when I looked again, it was gone. My pulse raced. I wasn't sure if it was a trick of the light or if I'd actually seen something, but the feeling of being watched returned, stronger this time. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there, just waiting, watching me. I tried to push it out of my mind and turned back to the fire, but the unease only grew stronger. I pulled my backpack closer to me and sat back down, trying to focus on the warmth of the fire and the soothing crackle of the burning wood. The night pressed on, and eventually, I forced myself to settle down in my tent. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was alone in the wilderness, and the mind can play tricks when it's isolated like that. But as I lay there in my sleeping bag, the sounds from the forest kept gnawing at me. The crackling noises, the occasional snap of a twig, the feeling of eyes on my back. It all kept me wide awake, even though I tried to shut it out. Around midnight, I heard a sharp, distinct noise, a loud thud, like something heavy had fallen in the woods. My body tensed. I waited, straining to listen. The sound wasn't repeated, but the air felt heavier, like it was filled with static. I grabbed my flashlight again, shining it out through the mesh of the tent. My pulse thudded in my ears as I scanned the area. Nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That sense of being watched, of something just beyond the firelight, continued to grow stronger. I stayed still, listening to the quiet, waiting for the next sound. But it never came. After what felt like an eternity, I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, I woke up to an eerie stillness. The air felt thick, heavy, as though something was wrong. My mind raced as I tried to shake off the remnants of my uneasy dreams. I unzipped the tent and stepped out, squinting against the bright morning sunlight. The campsite was just as I had left it, but the woods, they felt different. There was something off about them, a quiet that was too quiet. The birds weren't chirping, and the wind had stopped. As I made breakfast, I glanced around, trying to spot any signs of who or what had been out there last night. My eyes landed on something strange near the edge of the woods. A set of footprints. They weren't animal tracks. They were human-sized, but uneven, like someone had been walking, stumbling through the brush. The tracks led from the woods, passed by my tent, and disappeared back into the trees. I didn't need to follow them to know that they weren't mine. The realization hit me like a cold wave. There had been someone here last night, someone who had watched me from the woods, and now they were gone. I packed up my camp as quickly as I could, stuffing everything into my backpack. I didn't even stop to take in the beauty of the place one last time. My heart pounded in my chest as I hiked back down the trail, my eyes darting to every shadow in the trees. I didn't stop until I reached the parking lot, where a few cars were parked, their owners having already left for the day. It wasn't until I was back in my car, safe and sound, that the tension in my shoulders finally eased. But I couldn't shake the memory of those footprints, or the feeling of being watched. I don't know who or what was out there that night. I don't know if it was a person, or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me in the isolation of the wilderness. But I do know this: I haven't been camping since, and if I ever do decide to go again, I'll be a lot more careful about choosing my spot. Because in the woods, you're never truly alone. It was a late autumn night in 2017, somewhere deep in the wilds of the Welsh countryside, the kind of place where the roads are narrow and winding, and the forests feel ancient, as if they've been standing guard for centuries. I was 25 at the time, a bit of an adrenaline junkie who loved the outdoors, and this camping trip was supposed to be a solo adventure to get away from it all. I had taken time off from work and had rented a small cabin in the middle of nowhere. The plan was simple: pitch my tent, light a fire, and just relax under the stars. Little did I know, the trip would soon turn into something I would never forget. The weather had been calm when I arrived in the afternoon. I set up camp quickly, eager to get settled before it got dark. The area was quiet, with nothing but the sound of rustling leaves and distant birds. The cabin was just a small, worn structure with an old wood-burning stove and a couple of old chairs. It had been uninhabited for some time, but it wasn't a place that worried me. It felt like the kind of place where a person could hide away from the world. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, a chill set in, and the clouds started to gather overhead. I didn't think much of it at first. I had a rain jacket and a couple of warm layers, so I figured I'd be fine. As the evening wore on, the air became heavy, and the distant rumblings of thunder grew louder. I was sitting by the fire, tossing a few more logs on, when the first drops of rain started to fall. First, it was just a light drizzle, the kind of rain that was easy to ignore, almost soothing. But it didn't take long before it picked up into a steady downpour, soaking everything in its path. The fire began to hiss and crackle as the rain splashed against the logs. I quickly moved into the cabin to wait it out, thinking it would pass soon enough. The storm didn't stop. In fact, it seemed to grow worse by the hour. The wind howled outside, shaking the trees and making the walls of the cabin creak in protest. By the time it was fully dark, the storm was relentless. Sheets of rain poured from the sky, and the wind tore through the forest like it was alive. The noise outside was deafening. Rain slamming against the roof, branches crashing together, and the occasional loud thunderclap that made the entire cabin shake. I had hoped the storm would die down after an hour or so, but it was now approaching midnight, and there was no sign of it letting up. The cabin felt colder with every passing minute. The fire in the stove had long since gone out, and I didn't feel like dealing with it in the rain. I curled up in the corner of the cabin under a blanket and tried to get some sleep, but the sound of the storm made it impossible to relax. The wind screamed and the rain slapped against the windows like it was trying to get in. Then, around 2 a.m., the noises outside changed. There was something else in the air, something strange that made my spine tingle. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the atmosphere felt wrong. The wind had shifted direction, and now it sounded like it was coming from the opposite side of the cabin. The trees outside, which had been swaying heavily before, suddenly went still. The silence that followed felt unnerving, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Then I heard something, a faint thudding noise, almost like footsteps. They were slow at first, deliberate, and it didn't take long to realize they weren't coming from the path leading to the cabin. They were coming from the woods behind me, where the trees were thick and dark. I tried to brush it off as an animal or the wind playing tricks, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The footsteps continued for a few minutes, getting closer and closer. It wasn't the casual, random rhythm of someone just walking through the woods. These were heavy, measured steps, the kind that made the ground thud with each footfall. Whoever or whatever was out there was pacing, like it was waiting for something or someone. I grabbed my flashlight, heart racing, and peered through the cabin's foggy windows. The storm made it hard to see anything clearly, but I could make out a shape in the darkness. A figure standing perfectly still, not far from the edge of the trees. The figure didn't move, just stood there in the downpour, staring at the cabin. I couldn't make out any features, but I could feel its presence as if it were staring straight into me, watching me with intent. My mind raced as I thought of all the possible explanations. Maybe it was another camper, someone else who had gotten stuck in the storm and had wandered too far. But the more I thought about it, the less likely that seemed. The figure hadn't moved, and something about the stillness of the night didn't sit right with me. No animal, no person could stand perfectly still in a downpour like that, especially not for so long. I stayed there, frozen, watching it, waiting for something to happen. The thudding steps stopped, but the figure remained in place. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my breathing shallow. The flashlight trembled in my hands, and I had to fight the urge to run out and confront whatever it was. But I wasn't stupid. I'd seen enough horror movies to know better than to go out there. Whoever or whatever was out there clearly wasn't in any hurry. The minutes dragged on, feeling like hours, and then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure turned and vanished back into the trees, disappearing into the storm without a trace. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest that I thought it might burst. But I didn't move. I stayed crouched by the window, eyes glued to the dark. I had no intention of leaving the cabin, but my nerves were shot. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just an animal or maybe someone else out there in the storm. But deep down, I knew what I had seen wasn't right. I didn't sleep that night. The rain continued to pour, but the figure never came back. Morning eventually arrived, and the storm began to subside. The forest was eerily quiet now, the calm after the chaos. I waited until the first light of day broke through the clouds before I stepped outside. I knew I had to check the area around the cabin just to be sure. I found nothing, no footprints, no signs of anything out of the ordinary. The ground was muddy, but there was no trace of anyone having walked near the cabin. The trees around me stood silent and unmoving in the early morning light, as if nothing had happened. I packed up and left shortly after, not wanting to stick around any longer than I had to. I didn't know what I had seen that night, but I had a feeling that whatever it was, it hadn't been human. It left no trace, and it certainly didn't act like any creature I had ever encountered. I've never gone camping alone in the Welsh countryside again. It was the fall of 2017 when I decided to take a break from the chaos of my life and go camping. I needed some time away from the noise, from the demands, from everything. I was 25 at the time, and I had always loved the idea of escaping into the wild. I'd gone on hikes, day trips, but this was my first real camping experience. I picked a spot in the northern Arizona woods, a quiet place far from the nearest town. There were no tourist sites, no lodges, just trees, rocks, and silence. Perfect. I set off alone in my old Subaru, loaded with a tent, some camping gear, and enough food to last me a week. The drive took me through dusty, empty roads, a stretch of land with nothing but scrub brush and towering pines. The trees started to thin out as I reached my destination, a small campground that sat at the edge of a secluded forest area. I pitched my tent at the farthest corner, close to the trees, wanting to be as deep in the woods as possible. The sun was just beginning to set when I finished setting up. A chill was already creeping in, and the sky was turning dark. I spent the evening gathering firewood, and after a quick meal, I settled in front of the fire. The fire crackled and popped, the warmth of it contrasting with the cool air. There was no wind, just the sound of my own thoughts and the occasional rustle from the forest. I didn't think much about it at first, but there was something strange about the forest around me. It felt too still, like nature itself was holding its breath. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, but I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just nerves. I hadn't spent many nights alone in the wilderness, so it was probably just that. I checked my phone for signal, none. Good. I liked the isolation. Night fully settled in, and I climbed into my tent. The fire was still burning outside, and I could hear the occasional crackle of wood splitting. The forest had gone silent, though. I thought I heard something far off in the distance, maybe a coyote or some other animal, but I quickly dismissed it. I had never been particularly scared of the woods, and I wasn't about to let a few noises get to me now. I tried to sleep, but sleep didn't come easily. I kept thinking I heard someone walking outside my tent. The sound was faint, but it was there, like footsteps, slow, deliberate. I convinced myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or something moving through the trees. But the more I listened, the more uneasy I felt. The sounds weren't animal-like. The footsteps were too heavy, too rhythmic. I forced myself to stay still, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease crawling up my spine. The noises came and went, sometimes just outside my tent, sometimes farther away. At one point, I swear I heard what sounded like a low whistle, almost human. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation for the strange noises. I knew I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I stayed awake for hours, listening to the forest. At some point, the noises stopped. Complete silence. I finally drifted off into a restless sleep, but it wasn't long before I was jolted awake by a noise so close, it made me freeze in fear. I heard something tapping on the outside of my tent. It was light at first, almost like the brush of a hand. But then it became more insistent, louder, like something or someone was dragging their hand along the fabric. I lay there, motionless, barely able to breathe. I thought about calling out, but the fear that gripped me wouldn't let me. I didn't know if it was human or animal, but the way it moved, the way it lingered, didn't seem right. I listened for any more sounds, but it was as if the forest had closed in around me. The air felt thick, the kind of stillness that presses down on your chest. Then I heard it, a voice, a low, gravelly voice, whispering just outside the tent. "Come out." My heart nearly stopped. The voice sounded wrong, unnatural, like it was trying to mimic human speech but couldn't quite get it right. It didn't sound like a person. It sounded like something pretending to be one. The hairs on my neck stood on end, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. I didn't know what to do. I felt paralyzed with fear, but somehow I managed to gather enough courage to grab my flashlight. I flicked it on and unzipped the tent, pointing the beam of light into the darkness outside. Nothing. The clearing was empty, save for my campfire still burning faintly in the distance. I stood there for a few moments, waiting for something to appear, but nothing came. The silence was suffocating. I closed the tent quickly and locked it shut, my mind racing. I was alone. There was no one else around. But then why had I heard that voice? Why had I felt the presence of something just outside? It was only when I looked back at my tent that I saw the tracks. Deep, heavy footprints in the dirt, leading up to my tent and then vanishing into the trees. They weren't animal tracks. They were too large, too human. I knew I had to leave. I packed up my things in a hurry, my hands shaking with adrenaline. The light from the fire illuminated the forest, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig, made me jump. I knew that whatever had been outside my tent wasn't gone. I made it to my car as quickly as I could, but when I turned the engine over, it sputtered. The damn thing wouldn't start. Panic gripped me again. I was trapped in the middle of nowhere, and whatever was out there, it knew I was alone. That's when I saw it. A figure in the trees, just beyond the light of my headlights. It was standing perfectly still, watching me. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark shape against the dark forest. But I could feel its eyes on me. The figure stepped closer, and I could see it more clearly now. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its movements were jerky, like it didn't quite understand how to walk. Its face was obscured by shadows, but the way it moved, it wasn't human. The way its limbs bent at strange angles, the way its head tilted unnaturally. It was like something trying to mimic a person, but failing horribly. I slammed the car into reverse, and the engine roared to life. I didn't look back. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town, my heart still pounding, my hands still shaking. I didn't tell anyone about what happened, and I never went back to that campground. What I saw that night, I believe, was a skinwalker. I don't know what it wanted or why it was following me, but I know it wasn't human. The forest was its domain, and I was just a trespasser. I haven't gone camping alone since then, and I doubt I ever will again. It was the fall of 2017 when my friends and I decided to camp on a quiet, isolated farm just outside of town. I was 23 at the time, still figuring out life, and was looking for a weekend getaway to unwind. We had heard about this farm from a friend of a friend who mentioned that the landowner, an old man named Earl, rented out his property to people looking for a rustic camping experience. The farm had been in Earl's family for generations, a patch of land that stretched for miles, nestled at the foot of some pretty rough-looking hills. We didn't think much of it when we first arrived, just a simple weekend plan. There were 4 of us in total, me, my best friend Noah, his girlfriend, Emma, and Luke, a guy I knew from college but wasn't particularly close to. We rolled up in Noah's old Jeep, throwing our bags and tents into the back as we parked by the small barn near the edge of the property. Earl greeted us in a way that didn't sit right with me. He was a tall, wiry old man, his face lined with deep wrinkles that seemed to map out 100 years of hard living. He didn't smile much, but he welcomed us and pointed us toward a spot behind the barn where we could set up camp. "Keep to yourselves, and don't wander past the woods," he said. "Ain't safe over there." That was all he said about it, then turned and walked off without another word. Felt weird, but we didn't think much of it at the time. It was an odd comment, sure, but we chalked it up to him being just a grumpy old farmer. The place was quiet, really quiet. No birds chirped, no animals in sight. Only the rustling of the trees as the wind blew through. Felt almost unnatural. After setting up our tents, we built a fire near the edge of the camp, cooking up hot dogs and talking about whatever came to mind. The evening started off peaceful enough, the fire crackling, the night settling in around us. But as the darkness deepened, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I had always been good at tuning out small stuff, the usual weird noises that come with camping. But this was different. Around 9 p.m., we heard something that I couldn't ignore. It started as a low, distant rumble, like thunder far away, but there were no clouds in the sky. Then came the footsteps, soft at first, like someone walking through the tall grass, but getting closer and closer. Every few seconds, they'd stop, as if someone was standing still, listening. I glanced at Noah, who was sitting next to me by the fire, and saw that he looked equally unsettled. The footsteps stopped for a while, then began again. Only this time it was closer, too close. "Did you hear that?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, we should check it out." I wasn't keen on going out into the dark woods, but curiosity got the better of me. We both grabbed our flashlights, shining them into the darkness where the sounds seemed to be coming from. The others stayed behind, too spooked to move. As we moved toward the edge of the woods, I felt that same uneasy sensation pressing down on me, like the air itself was thicker. My heart pounded in my chest. Something didn't sit right. The night had gotten colder, and I realized we hadn't even thought to grab jackets. I turned to look back at the campfire, but the light seemed so far away now, the shadows swallowing everything around us. The footsteps had stopped. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and uneven. The crunch of our boots against the dry leaves was the only sound now. "Where is it coming from?" I whispered to Noah, my voice barely above a breath. Noah didn't answer right away. He just kept scanning the trees, his flashlight darting back and forth across the trunks. Then a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, tall and thin, his face obscured by the darkness of his hood. He stood still, staring at us, but didn't move. I froze. Noah tensed beside me. We both stood there for a long moment, staring at this guy. Something about him didn't feel right. He wasn't dressed like a typical camper or hiker. He was wearing old, torn clothes, with patches of dirt and grime all over him. "Hey!" Noah called out, trying to sound casual. "Are you lost or something?" The man didn't respond. He just stood there, his back to a large oak tree. For a moment, I thought maybe he was just some local who wandered out here for whatever reason. But then, as the seconds stretched on, I realized that he wasn't moving. Not even a twitch. It was like he was waiting. "What the hell's going on?" I muttered under my breath. Noah was about to say something else when the man finally moved. But it wasn't normal. He didn't walk. He just jerked forward, his body stiff, like he was being pulled by invisible strings. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Without a word, Noah grabbed my arm and yanked me back toward the camp. We didn't stop to look back at the man, didn't even check if he was following us. We just ran, fast as we could, pushing through the underbrush, jumping over fallen branches, not stopping until we reached the firelight. Emma and Luke were sitting there, wide-eyed. "What the hell was that?" Luke asked, his voice shaking. "I don't know," I said, panting. "Some guy, but he wasn't acting right." Noah looked at me, his face pale. "We need to get out of here. Now." We all agreed, no one even hesitating. It wasn't until we started packing up our things that we realized the man had somehow followed us. When I looked toward the barn, I saw his figure standing at the edge of the camp, just watching. But this time he wasn't alone. There were more figures emerging from the darkness, all of them standing still, staring. I don't know how we managed it, but we got everything packed up and into the Jeep in record time. Noah floored it and we sped out of there, not looking back until we hit the main road. As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. There were no more figures, just empty, dark farmland. But I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, waiting. To this day, I don't know who those people were or what they wanted. I don't know why Earl acted the way he did, or why he warned us to stay away from the woods. But I do know this: whatever we saw that night, whatever it was that followed us, it wasn't human. And I'll never camp on a farm again.